Okay, hi, good morning, and welcome to this talk, which is about Symfony 4 and Symfony Flex. We are going to see which new ideas and which changes come with this new version of Symfony. The subtitle is Core Ideas, Features and Improvements, but actually I didn't choose it. And we are going to talk more about core ideas rather than specific small features that you can check out in the documentation. So we are going to focus in the which important changes do we have with this new version. My name is Victoria. Can you hear me, right? Yeah. I work at Limenius, which is a company that I co-founded. We build their tailor-made projects for clients using Symfony for the backend and React for the frontend. We have been using Symfony for many years, since 2008. So we have seen most of its evolution, almost from the beginning. Symfony 4 is not like a big disruption, like it was, for example, Symfony 2 after Symfony 1. So it's not like that. But it is a significant evolution in the framework, okay? And we are going to see what is it about. Before going into more detail, I would like to explore a bit what are the motivations behind these changes. Because I think that when you decide, I guess that when you decide to change something like a framework that affects to so many people, so many developers, you must have or should have like good reasons to implement those changes, okay? So I had an alternative cover for this section. We can call it what are the driving forces behind, or why the hell do we have to change things again, which is what we usually think when we see a new version of our favorite framework. And already in May, Fabien Potencier, which is the creator of the framework, published a few blog posts about what were the upcoming changes and his motivations for building those changes. So he said, for example, as a developer, I want to start small without too many dependencies, but I also want to be able to grow my applications as I see fit, from a micro framework style app to a gigantic monolith, your choice. The framework should not get in the way. So this is already quite specific about what were his or their motivations, right? Going further, he said something about Symfony Flex as well, which we will see what is it exactly about. He said Symfony Flex is all about making it simple and easy to create any Symfony applications, from the most simple micro-style project to the more complex ones with dozens of dependencies. It automates adding and removing bundles. It takes care of giving you sensible defaults. It helps discovering good bundles. Okay, if you knew nothing about Symfony 4, with these two sentences, you have like a good, a good gathering of what we are going to see. It's quite condensed in these two sentences. I'm sure that those were their motivations, but I have a different or a complementary perspective. To me, it's quite interesting that what they have done could be seen as the result of a SWOT analysis, okay? I don't know if they did it. I was not there, but to me it matches quite well. As you know, a SWOT analysis is an analysis where you check out what are the strengths and the weaknesses of something, a product, a company, a project, whatever. That's the upper row. And then we check what are the opportunities and threats in the environment, okay? So why am I analyzing Symfony 2 in this context instead of Symfony 3? Because Symfony 3 was simply like a step in between, like a small step preparing ourselves for Symfony 4. So the big change is between Symfony 2 and 4. Okay, if we have to write down like the strengths of Symfony, the Symfony that we know, we could say that it's very flexible and powerful. I mean, with Symfony, you can build whatever you want. It's really good to build tailor-made applications. It's not like these high-level frameworks where you have everything done, but it's not so easy to tweak things. So flexible and powerful, I think that are two words that define Symfony quite well. If we go for the weaknesses, in Symfony 2, configuration took quite a bit of time when you had to install and remove bundles, when you have to declare a new service. So that was a bit time consuming. And for some developers, I don't know, not a very good thing of the framework. Also, Symfony had and have a steep learning curve. I mean, it wasn't something, and it's not something that you can simply arrive and start using in one day. So some other developers chose other frameworks that had different characteristics, okay? So this is about the internal analysis. What about the environment, which in our case is the web development environment, of course? How has it changed in the last years? Well, if you remember like 6 or 7 years ago, our landscape looked like this. When we were building an application with our favorite framework, in this case Symfony, we were creating our models, controllers, repositories, and also our templates, the presentation side with our framework, all of it with our Symfony 2. On top of it, there was some jQuery for some, you can call them fancier things or whatever, but that was very thin layer. Everything, almost everything was being built with a framework. While we were doing this, a bunch of new words were starting to show up. Backbone, Ember, Angular, Gulp, Grunt, more recently Vue, Webpack, React. So for many backend developers, those words were not important. For some other developers, they were even annoying. But during that time, while we were doing this and those words were there, the user was getting used to things like chats, notifications, immediate validations, and not so used kind of avoiding page reloads. So he was getting very used to the things that are built with those tools. Nowadays, the landscape is more like this. Quite often in our project, with our backend framework, we build the backend, we deal with the data, and we present it in an API for them to consume it and to do whatever they want to do. So this is more up to date, or we do this more often now. Even it can look like this. I mean, in applications that have a very rich front end, what we do is, just to prepare the data for them to use it. Can look also like this. We have different microservices, each of them with an API, and what we are doing is always that task. So in this context, what is expected from a backend framework nowadays? Okay? The landscape has changed a bit. What is expected is it must have a very good solution for building APIs, because it's something that we are going to do all the time. Somehow it's expected too that you can build some very common functionalities very easily, like admin panels, I don't know, sending emails, this kind of stuff. The framework is supposed to make easy for you to build those things. It should be efficient also, creating small apps, microservices, all these things that now we have to do. So in one word, it has to take good care of the backend, which is not a small task, but has changed a little bit along with the years. So if we go now for our lower row, in this environment, we have opportunities because we need to build a lot of APIs, we need to build microservices, and still they need a backend, and they are going to need it. So we need to focus on these things and do them very well. For a framework like Symfony, there are some threats. On the one hand, there are these other frameworks that have like a less steep learning curve or more out-of-the-box functionalities. And on the other hand, is also the front-end revolution, especially if we do as if it was not there, as if it has nothing to do with us. So this is what we had, and this is the new environment in which we are. Okay, so in front of this, what things should we change, right? And with this, we arrive to Symfony 4 philosophy. For those of you who doesn't know exactly where we are now, we had Symfony 2 for a long time. Then at the end of 2015, we got the first stable version of Symfony 3 that has been there for a while, as I said, preparing ourselves for the next move. And Symfony 4, the first stable version, is going to be released in 3 weeks, I think. So before, in Symfony 2, we had two things: a full stack framework and a set of independent components. This approach was very fruitful. When we wanted to build something with Symfony, we usually went for the full framework. But the isolated components were also there. Actually, it was kind of a revolution in the PHP community, since many popular PHP projects use Symfony components, like Drupal, Laravel, Propel, Silex. All of them are using one or several or many Symfony components. So this was very cool. But in reality, when we wanted to build something with Symfony, we wanted to develop with Symfony 2, it generally meant using the full framework. So, for example, if you wanted to build a console app before, you had two options: to pick the full framework or to go with for the components approach. But that was not so simple. It was a bit tricky. Configuration was not so easy. And quite often, independently of what you wanted to build, you were choosing the whole framework, either for a web application, an API, a microservice, whatever. Now with Symfony 4, these changes. Depending on what you are going to build, the set of dependencies that you are going to use is going to be different. So if you are going to build an API, you are going to have a certain set of dependencies that are exactly what you are going to use in your API project. The same goes for a microservice. The dependencies that you need maybe for that service are not the same that for an API project. And if you want to build like a traditional web app with everything, well, you may end up having almost the full framework, but because you need it at that point for that particular task. So this is, as you can see, quite a change. Now we are going to start small, and depending on what we want to build, we are going to grow our project. All right? So Symfony 4 is not a new framework, it's more like a change of mindset in the same framework. Okay? For them, to summarize, the idea was this. They wanted to make easy to create projects with lots or few dependencies. And in order to achieve that, they wanted to automate as much as possible bundle installation and configuration. It makes sense. If you are going to have to install and remove dependencies, packages, it's important that this is easy to do, that this is not painful. So it's key that we can make our project grow or shrink very easily, right? If we want to do these transformations, we need something to smooth out these transformations. And here is when Symfony Flex comes into play. Symfony Flex is going to be that thing that helps us to do what we just mentioned. It is not a new version of Symfony. It may sound as a new version, but it's not. It's simply a tool to implement Symfony 4 philosophy, or to help us working with this new philosophy. What is it about? It's simply automation to the max. So Symfony Flex is going to do for us lots of things that we are not supposed to do, since they can be automatic. That's the idea. Technically, it's a composer plugin that comes with Symfony 4. And the idea is to move towards zero configuration time, okay? It also promotes a curated list of recipes. You may not understand this sentence yet, but you will very soon. Okay, regarding the internals, what it does is to modify the behavior of the require and update commands of Composer. And it allows Symfony to perform certain amount of tasks before or after these commands, okay? We'll see it in detail. So how does it work? If we have in our project Symfony Flex and we run composer require mailer, for example, or composer require rec mailer, which is the same thing, Symfony Flex is going to install and enable Swift Mailer bundle. This is our application with Symfony. We run composer require mailer, and this is going to ask to the Symfony Flex server, do you have any information about this mailer? Is there something there that you have? If the answer is no, I don't have anything, then this is going to simply install things in the way that we know. Calling composer, do whatever you can with this, install it. But if the answer is yes, I have something, here you have a recipe, then Symfony Flex is going to say, cool, let's see what's in there, what's in this recipe. Reading that is going to decide what packages are going to be installed, is going to ask composer to install them, and then later or before, is going to run any tasks that are specified in this recipe. Okay? That's the whole, that's how it works. That's the process. And what is exactly a recipe? Well, a recipe is a manifest JSON, basically. It can have also other files or folders. It explains to Symfony Flex what it has to do, so which kind of tasks with things it has to install. And it looks like this. We have some options, bundles. Here we are saying which environments this bundle needs to enable. Copy from recipe. We are saying which files and folders need to be copied from to our project. Okay? Env. We are defining which environment variables are going to be added to our application. We are going to talk about environment variables now in a few minutes. And aliases. These are just a few shorter names to mention this package. So if we could have done composer require mailer or composer require mail, is exactly the same thing. Where are these recipes stored? Where? There are two repositories, core and contrib. These two repositories are quite different. Core is like the official repository to store the recipes. It's very opinionated in the sense that only the packages that the Symfony core team think that are the best ones, or the ones that deserve to be there, are going to be there. So it needs the approval from the Symfony core team. Symfony Flex, by default, looks in this repository. And the aliases that we just explained can be only used with the recipes that are stored in this repository. On the other hand, we have the contrib, which is like the community repository. Everyone can make a pull request to put a recipe here. By default, Symfony Flex doesn't look into this repository, but it's very easy to enable it. Okay? So as you can see, there are a few differences. You may think, this is a bit unfair. Why such a big difference? Well, the truth is that at the beginning, the initial idea was to ship Symfony 4 only with the core repository. So we are kind of lucky that they changed their mind because of the feedback of the community, and we have two of them. All right. How does it look to create a new Symfony application with Symfony Flex? You could do something like this. Composer, create project, Symfony skeleton, name of your project. This is going to download the Symfony skeleton, which is a composer JSON with these dependencies. And it's going to run composer install. The first package that is going to be installed is Symfony Flex. And then Symfony Flex is going to hook into this process and start doing his magic, which we just explained. Do you have a recipe for this? If yes, what do you have to do? And so on. So this is the creation of a new Symfony application with Symfony Flex. Question, may I avoid using Symfony Flex? Yes, you may. You can still install and configure things as you are used to, but the default with Symfony 4 is to work with Symfony Flex. So they are really interested that, in this, and this is what they are kind of promoting, right? Like the opposite question, may I use Symfony Flex with an old project, a project that wasn't initially built with it? Yes, but installing Symfony Flex is not enough. Why? Because you need a certain directory structure that we will see in a minute, okay? So if you want further information about some advice on how to achieve this, you can read this documentation. It is possible and it's not extremely difficult, but there are things you need to do. So before explaining more new stuff that we have in the new version, let's focus in what has changed. Which things do we have to relearn or to get used to them again? You will see that they are, I mean, you will clearly see them. I mean, you cannot avoid to see what has changed, but they are quite easy to relearn. They are not going to interfere in our work so much or to change our work so much. So, do you remember those never-ending discussions, like when Symfony 2 came up about should our application have only one bundle, or should it have many, or should it have thousands of bundles? So people got really sometimes angry in these discussions because they were sure about one of the options. So guess what was the right answer? In one of these posts, he says, Fabian, we work hard during the last few months to make sure that Symfony 4 can embrace bundle-less applications. So Symfony 4 will recommend and generate bundle-less applications. The answer was, no, it wasn't one or multiple, it was zero bundle. So this may sound like a bad joke if you were really into one of the other options, but well, at the end of the day, you will see that it doesn't mean like a big disruption in our work either. He also explains the reasons behind. No more bundle for your code. You just used APP as a namespace for any class under source directory. It reduces the perceived complexity. It also makes your code feel more decoupled from Symfony. It's also something a bit more going towards standardization. It doesn't say that here, but it's another of the reasons. So many of the changes that we are going to see are there because they are more standard compared to, I don't know, other technologies and so on. So removing the bundle from your application is one of these changes, okay? As I said, in practice, this is not a big deal. It's not going to be something really important. And bundles are still there. I mean, you are going to install bundles from third parties. It's only that your application is not a bundle anymore, okay? The directory structure, as we have said, has changed quite a bit. We have a config folder with the configuration. What it used to be web now is public. Our code is in the SRC, in the source folder. Then we have templates and vendor. Okay, let's see that these changes, at the beginning they are a bit surprising, but at the end of the day, it's the same. I mean, we are going to write the same controllers, the same services, the same models. All that doesn't change. They are like, it's like the wrapper, what is changing. Let's look into more detail. We have a new file, which is config bundles.php. Here is where the installed bundles are going to be referenced. Symfony Flex is going to write into this file. Since it is going to be something that we don't do, that it does, it's here where he's going to write. This used to be the APP kernel, if you remember. Now it's bundles.php. Config YML is not there anymore. Instead, now we have a folder, which is packages, with many small configuration files, one for each package. Okay? Now we have to forget about that long file. We instead have several or many small ones. Another thing, parameters YML is not there anymore. Now we have .env, and there we are going to have environment variables, which is kind of a more standard way to manage settings. Okay? it will look like this. This is our .m file, and there we have these variables, app-env, app-debug, app-secret database URL, and whatever else we have. One more change that can be a bit surprising is that we don't have two web front controllers anymore. So now we are not going to be able to do that, changing the URL for trying the development environment or the production one. Okay? We just have public index PHP. It can be a bit trickier to switch between them, but apparently this is considered a better practice, more secure and so on. This index PHP has this line where Symfony knows in which environment are we using at the moment. Okay? So that's all about which things have changed, which things we need to think or do differently now. So let's go again for the cool part. What's new? What other stuff do we have there? Of course, Symfony Flex, which is the biggest change, but apart from that, what else? So some of the key changes were already introduced in Symfony 3. Okay? Since it has happened quite fast, maybe some of you are not aware of it, and it is worth it to mention it. Many of them were related to make configuration more automatic. Of course, preparing the framework for what was coming for Symfony Flex. It was we had this auto wiring, simpler configuration thanks to these options, auto configuration. So at the end of the day, already with Symfony 3, for all the standard tasks of configuration, we don't have to do almost anything. Okay? There were another type of changes, moving always towards further standardization, like PSR 4 based service discovery, PSR 11 containers, and so on. So all these things, every time that there is something kind of important that comes new, is in the blog. So I'm not going to go into detail in each of these things, since you can check it in the documentation. My idea is just to let you know that these things are there. Okay, this was already in Symfony 3. In Symfony 4, there have been many other additions that maybe are not like, you are not going to read about them in the newspaper, but they are powerful ones. There have been improvements in guard authentication, forms, injection of tag services, console exceptions, overriding templates, and so on. There is also an integration with Bootstrap form theme, and many, many other things. Small but interesting things. All of them on top of the things that we already know. So they are just additions to the framework that we are used to. And all of that you can check it in the documentation. The documentation is actually quite good. But I want to focus and to really spend some time explaining one change that I think is really interesting. Finally, when we had lost almost all hope, we have a great solution for the assets. Okay? They had seemed to forget about the assets since aesthetic. I mean, it was like, do whatever you want to do with it, use gulp or use grant, use whatever you want to do. And they had no solution for dealing with them. So now we have Webpack and Core. Webpack and Core is a thin layer that simplifies the integration of Webpack in our Symfony project. If you know Webpack, Webpack is a very powerful tool to manage our assets, but it's a bit tricky to configure. It's not the simplest thing out there. So this Webpack and Core is actually going to smooth out this task for us. It's going to make it simple to use Webpack with Symfony. And I think this is a great idea. This is, by the way, Ryan Weaver is the guy who wrote this piece of software. So this is like a great idea. I personally didn't need it because I was already using Webpack for years with Symfony. But why do I think it's a great idea? Because it means that they are not like getting blind about what is going on out there. Instead, they are actually looking at what's happening and trying to adapt the framework to the new challenges. So for me, this is good news, that they are into building this type of thing. Okay, I have already explained what is Symfony 4 about, what does Symfony Flex do, some of the important changes. I'd like to show you a bit how it feels to build a project with Symfony Flex, okay? We are going to, or try to, these things sometimes don't work, but we are going to try to create a project with API Platform and Easy Admin. For those of you that don't know these tools, API Platform is a project built with Symfony, which basically provides a platform to build APIs, like very complete APIs, with Swagger documentation, integration with Docker, like lots of things. Probably, if what you want to build is a minimalistic API, you are not going to use this. But in some cases, it can be useful. On the other hand, the Easy Admin is a bundle to create admin panels. As you may know, in Symfony we had kind of two main choices, Sonata and Easy Admin. I personally have used much more Sonata than Easy Admin. I think Sonata is very cool for building like complex admin panels. But this is the default choice for the core repository, so we are going to try it. And I think it's quite good for building simple things. That's my opinion. So these are the things that we are going to do. We are going to use Composer, create project, Symfony Skeleton, as we have seen, go into the folder, add a few dependencies, which are basically API platform, admin, and a web server, because we need a server. We are going to create an entity, configure our database, run doctrine schema update, tell API platform and Easy Admin about our entity, run the server, and see what we have there, okay? It should take only a few minutes. Let's do it, or let's try to do it. Okay. Okay, we go into, let me sit down, which is easier. Composer. Let's see, yeah. Create project, Symfony Skeleton, and we call it, I don't know, API Admin. Let's see if it works. Okay, it's downloading the last stable version, which is 3.3.5, but with Symfony 4, it's going to be the same thing. All right, we set API admin, right? Okay, now we are gonna install API platform, rec API. API is the alias for this package that is also in the core repository. Okay. Okay, all these are things that Symfony Flex is taking care of. It is configuring and doing some tasks according to the recipe of API platform, right? We do the same with Easy Admin, which we just need to type admin for it. We need to install as well web server. Okay. Next step, let me check. Yeah, we have to create our entity. We are going to do this here. We are going to create a movie entity. I'm going to cheat a little bit because I already have, let me check, this somewhere. Where do I have this? Here, I think. Okay. So we copy this here. This is a simple entity movie with a few properties and setter and getters. Okay, that's all. Okay, we close this. Yep. next thing we need to do is to configure our database. I already created a database, so I only need to configure it here. The database I created, if I'm not wrong, is called API admin 2, with API admin pass, and API admin database. Yeah, user pass. Okay, should be fine. Yeah. What else? Now we need to tell API platform, well, to run the scheme. This. Yeah. Right. And we need to tell API platform and EC admin about our entity. So for that, let me remember. In our entity, we have already told API platform about this entity with this annotation. So we have used this, and API resource is telling API platform that we are going to use or that we want it to be aware of our entity. Regarding EC admin, we are going to go to our config, as we said, packages, and as you can see, they have already created for us, not they, Symfony Flex has already created for us, thanks to the EC admin recipe, this config file. Okay, and here we are going to say that we have this entity. Okay, movie. That's right. And let's see if it works. Okay, min server run. Okay, apparently it looks good. Here, this is API platform. As you can see, by default, we already have a few endpoints. Get movies, post movies, get one movie, put one movie, delete, so on. And regarding the admin, if we go here to /admin, we have an admin panel, right? We can actually add a movie, fiction, Tarantino. Thing was that, save changes, okay. So this is true that it's a very simple example, but it's a lot of functionality what we already have here, okay. And if we go back to API platform and now try to get our movies, try it out, execute. So here it is the movie we just introduced. So this works. Of course, as you know, when you want to do more complicated things, well, things get complicated, they can. But it's not a bad thing that you can start with this. So I wanted to show you this example, first of all, for you to get a feeling of how is it to build things with Symfony Flex, but also because the feeling is a bit different from what we are used to in Symfony 2. As Symfony developers, we are very used to build everything. I mean, we normally didn't have like things already built for us. So this is kind of a bit of a change, right? We are going to talk about this approach later. But it's there. It's something that we can see. They have tried a little bit, or they are trying to move, or at least to add this possibility to the framework. Okay, we have seen what is all this about, the main changes. I'd like now to talk a bit about, to evaluate those changes a little bit. So at least to do what we can do now, which is maybe a bit early, but we can guess a little bit. So there are a few fair questions about Symfony 4 and Symfony Flex. Some of them are questions that I myself have, but also questions that I have read about from other developers. First one can be, is it more difficult now to develop a standard web project? I mean, when you want to add all the dependencies, is it now more difficult than it was with Symfony 2? Well, it can be slightly more difficult since you have to write Composer, require several things, I don't know, templates, ORM, validator, form. But since Symfony Flex is going to do all the, boring stuff for us, it's not so much. And actually, we don't have yet a recipe for building the whole thing, but I think it's going to happen at some point. I mean, probably they will have a recipe to add like all the common stuff. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Second question, trying to make configuration extra simple, is it getting more obscure? This is a concern that some people already had when looking at the changes in Symfony 3. So if something is getting done for you, all the configuration, when something is not working or you really want to go and see what's going on, it can be more difficult so more obscure. So for some developers that are used to do all by themselves, they are not so happy with this. At least this is a concern some people may have. Is this more magical? Are we going backwards instead of forward? So it's a question that some people have. And third, are official packages too promoted? I mean, is the advantage for the official packages too big comparing them to the other packages? Are some developers going to, I don't know, to quit writing bundles because they are not going to be like in the official repository? So these things are questions that are out there. It's not a bad idea to think about them, I think. But leaving this aside, on the one hand, I think that this is still early to know. We will find out all these things and the evolution of them. Let's focus on the good. What I think is very good about the new changes are these things. First of all, in my opinion, it makes total sense not to carry dependencies that we are not going to use, especially in the new environment that we know we are now. Also, as we have seen, the things that we need to adapt to are not very difficult. There are just a few things, a new directory structure, some other few things, but they are not going to interfere with our normal work. Another good thing is that everything is moving towards standardization. For example, this directory structure is more standard than the one we had before. It's also more flat and this thing. So moving toward standardization, in my opinion, is always good as well. And what is the things that I see that are very good? First one is that very clearly they are trying to adapt to the new challenges. So they are not just saying, we have a perfect framework, this is what we have, this is what we do, I don't care what's going on out there. No, they are trying actually to bring new things to the table and things that make sense if you look at what is happening out there. And for me, as I already mentioned, Webpack Encore is it's very good news, okay? Because it means kind of we are not fighting against the front end. We need to build things together, so let's put some work into this. Actually, summarizing, I think that there are two implicit bets in this new approach. One of them is, let's embrace the position of the backend and try to adapt to our times, okay? And I fully agree with this bet. I think it's a very good idea, and I don't see any downside of it. But there is a second bet, which is not related to the other one, that sounds a bit like, let's keep our Symfony as powerful and flexible as always, while trying to gain some ground from other frameworks that are like more high-level oriented. So I think, and it's fair for them to try that, but I think this is a bet that is also implicit in these changes. And why I think this can be a bit risky. It can be very good as well, but we don't know yet. So Symfony was and is great to create tailor-made apps. So when you try to gain, I don't know, to compete against these higher-level frameworks, I think we can have a pessimistic and an optimistic scenario. The pessimistic one is that we lose focus, and that maybe some developers that are very used to build things or everything by themselves are not so interested anymore in these changes. This, in my opinion, is something that could happen. But of course, there is also an optimistic outcome, which I think is what they want to get, and I believe it can happen, is that Symfony remains as good as always or better for building tailor-made things, plus now it's easier to have already made functionalities, okay? So we will need to wait to see where are we going. But yeah, honestly, I think we can go for I'm an optimistic person, and I think we can go for the optimistic outcome. But we cannot forget that there are some risks out there, okay? So some final thoughts. If we go back to our SWOT analysis, I think you can agree with me that it actually looks that they had looked at the opportunities and the threats out there, and they have tried to solve the weaknesses of the framework while keeping the strengths or even improving them. So, as I said, I don't know if they did this, but to me it looks like they did. And this is not a bad thing, this is a very good thing. It means that they are trying to confront the new challenges, okay? So this is a clear answer to the current times. It's still early to know if they are right or not, if they have chosen the right things or not, but for me they look promising at least. There are some risks, but it depends a lot on the evolution. And I think it doesn't depend so much on what have they done, it's more about what are we going to do with what they have done. So this evolution the community has a lot to say, as in any other framework. So now it's time for us to think and to say what are we going to do with this new version of our framework. I hope that with this talk you have a clearer idea of what is Symfony 4 about and Symfony Flex, and that you are, I don't know, willing to and excited to test it. Thank you.